Let me paint you two pictures. Picture one. A man steps out of a brand new Lamborghini Urus. He's wearing head-to-toe Gucci, the logo visible on his belt, his shoes, his watch, even his sunglasses. His phone case is designer. His Instagram is a curated gallery of private jets, bottle service, and rooftop pools. He looks extraordinarily rich. Picture two. A woman pulls up in a decade-old Land Rover Defender with a dent above the rear wheel arch. She's wearing a cream cashmere sweater, dark slacks, and leather loafers that are clearly old. The sole slightly worn, the leather broken into the shape of her foot. No visible logos, no flashy jewelry. She doesn't glance around the room when she walks in. She already knows everyone in it. One of these people is performing wealth. The other one is wealth. And the fascinating counterintuitive truth is this. The woman in the old Land Rover likely has 10 times the net worth of the man in the Lamborghini, and she has absolutely no interest in you knowing that. Welcome to one of the most fascinating dynamics in the entire sociology of money. Why old money families deliberately, consistently, and almost religiously avoid looking rich. Not because they're ashamed of their wealth, not because they can't afford luxury, but because, in their world, looking rich is one of the most embarrassing things you can do. Today, we're going deep on the history, the psychology, the fashion, the architecture, the social codes, and the very specific reasons why the wealthiest old families on earth have built entire cultures around the art of not showing it. The sociological foundation, conspicuous versus inconspicuous consumption. To understand why old money doesn't look rich, we have to go back to 1899, and a brilliant contrarian American economist named Thorstein Veblen. Veblen was watching the Gilded Age unfold around him. The Industrial Revolution had minted an entirely new class of wealthy Americans. Steel magnates, railroad barons, oil tycoons, and these people were spending their fortunes in the most visible, extravagant ways imaginable. Mansions modeled on Versailles, dinners served by liveried footmen, ball gowns encrusted with actual diamonds. The whole spectacle was impossible to miss. Veblen sat down and wrote a book about what he was observing, called The Theory of the Leisure Class. In it, he coined a phrase that has never left our cultural vocabulary: conspicuous consumption. His argument was precise and devastating. The new rich weren't spending lavishly because they needed to. They were spending lavishly to signal their status, to prove publicly that they had arrived. The spending was the message. But here's what Veblen also noticed, and what most people miss: the old aristocracy, the families whose wealth predated the industrial age by generations, were not doing this. They didn't need to. They had nothing to prove. Their status was so established, so assumed, so deeply woven into the social fabric that no amount of diamond-encrusted jewelry could have added to it. And crucially, performing wealth the way the nouveau riche did was to them a sign of insecurity. It was the behavior of someone who wasn't sure they belonged. This distinction is the entire foundation of why old money doesn't look rich. It's not modesty. It's not frugality for its own sake. It is the behavior of people who are so secure in their position that external validation is not just unnecessary, it's vaguely embarrassing. A century after Veblen, the French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu expanded on this idea with the concept of cultural capital. The idea that class distinction isn't just about money, it's about taste, behavior, manners, education, and the invisible codes of conduct that mark you as belonging to a particular stratum of society. In Bourdieu's framework, the old wealthy class had developed a habitus, a set of deeply ingrained dispositions, preferences, and behavioral patterns that set them apart from the newly rich in ways that couldn't be bought. The Gucci logo can be purchased. The ease with which you navigate a conversation about 18th century French literature, the posture you carry through a room, the way you hold a fork, these are the products of a lifetime of immersion, and old money families understood this, even when they couldn't articulate it academically. The result? A centuries-old cultural code that treats visible wealth as, at best, unnecessary, and at worst, as a form of social humiliation. Where it started, the European aristocracy and the birth of understatement. The aesthetic philosophy of old money didn't emerge overnight. It has roots that run deep into European aristocratic culture, particularly in 18th and 19th century Britain and France, where the concept of noblesse oblige shaped everything from dress to conversation to the size of a dinner party. The British aristocracy, in particular, developed what can only be described as an almost pathological aversion to ostentation. The code was simple. A gentleman did not try. Trying, appearing to make an effort, appearing to care what others thought of your appearance or your wealth, was a form of vulgarity. The ideal was sprezzatura, a term borrowed from the Italian Renaissance, meaning the art of making difficult things appear effortless. You wore your clothes as if you had thrown them on without a second thought. You conversed with wit as if you hadn't rehearsed it. You hosted magnificent dinners as if it required no particular effort. This culture was born partly from genuine confidence. When your family has held a title and estates for 400 years, you don't need to announce it, and partly from a very deliberate strategy of exclusion. The old European aristocracy had something the new industrial rich desperately wanted: access, entry into the right drawing rooms, introductions to the right people, membership in the right clubs. And the unspoken rule was that you couldn't purchase entry with visible wealth. In fact, displaying your money was the surest way to mark yourself as someone who didn't belong. In 18th and 19th century Britain, old money families established codes of conduct centered on subtlety, restraint, and continuity. The British aristocracy had a deep preference for classic tailoring, practical yet luxurious fabrics like tweed and wool, and subtle patterns like houndstooth and plaid. Fashion was about continuity, not trend-setting, ensuring the wealthy always appeared dignified and authoritative, but never flamboyant. These codes crossed the Atlantic and took root in American old money culture during the Gilded Age. Families like the Astors, the Lowells, and the Cabots, who predated the industrial nouveau riche, adopted the same principles: quality over flash, understatement over display, heirlooms over novelties. While the Vanderbilts and Carnegies were building Baroque mansions, the older American aristocracy was quietly appalled. In their eyes, the extravagance was not a sign of success. It was a sign of insecurity. There's a famous saying attributed to the old Boston Brahmin families, the hereditary elite of New England, that captures this perfectly. The Lowells speak only to Cabots, and the Cabots speak only to God. The implication was not just snobbery, it was a total indifference to the opinions of outsiders, including the opinion that wealth needed to be demonstrated. The psychology of nothing to prove. The most important psychological driver behind old money's understated aesthetic is something researchers have called secure high status, and it fundamentally changes how a person relates to their wealth. Consider the psychology of the newly wealthy. You have worked, perhaps for decades, to build something. You have climbed from one income bracket to another, experienced financial anxiety, made sacrifices, and finally arrived at a place of material security. That journey is real and it is meaningful, but it also leaves a mark. The psychological residue of that climb is what sociologists call wealth anxiety. The fear of losing what was just gained, combined with a deep desire to validate the achievement through visible markers. The Rolex, the luxury car, the designer wardrobe. These are not just purchases, they are proof. Proof that the climb was real. Proof to yourself and to others that you made it. Old money operates from precisely the opposite psychological position. Wealth is not an achievement. It is a condition of birth. It is not something gained. It is something managed. There is no climb to validate, no arrival to celebrate, no status to prove. The wealth is simply there, as it has always been, as it is expected to continue being. This creates what psychologists describe as a fundamentally different relationship with material possessions. When you have nothing to prove, the entire apparatus of status signaling becomes redundant. And when it becomes redundant, it becomes something worse. It becomes gauche. Harvard Business School research published in the Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin found that genuinely wealthy individuals, particularly those from multi-generational wealth, exhibit a pattern of behavior requiring no external validation. They have what the research describes as extreme self-confidence in their position, eliminating the need for constant reassurance through material display. They have, in the researchers' framework, already won the game, and so they stop keeping score publicly. This is why, when you study the behavior of genuinely old, wealthy families across cultures, whether American, British, French, or Italian, you find the same pattern repeating. The quieter the money, the older it is. The louder the money, the newer it tends to be. It is not a coincidence. It is the logical outcome of psychological security versus psychological anxiety around wealth. The famous Italian industrialist Gianni Agnelli, heir to the Fiat fortune, and one of the most photographed men of the 20th century, became a global style icon not through ostentation, but through studied nonchalance. He wore his watch over his shirt cuff. He mixed expensive custom-made suits with casual elements in ways that looked almost accidental. His style communicated something more powerful than wealth. It communicated indifference to others' opinions. And paradoxically, that indifference was the most magnetic quality he possessed. The wardrobe, what old money actually wears and why. Let's get specific because the clothing choices of old money families are not random. They are the result of a coherent philosophy applied consistently over generations. The first principle is no visible logos. This is perhaps the most immediately recognizable distinction between old money and new money dressing. The old wealthy have what fashion insiders call anti-logomania. They are not trying to broadcast brand names because brand names are a form of advertisement, and the only people who need to advertise are those who need to be noticed. The philosophy is almost exactly opposite. If you truly have nothing to prove, a giant LV monogram or a conspicuous Gucci double G is not a signal of success. It's a signal of insecurity dressed up as confidence. This doesn't mean old money doesn't wear expensive clothes. Far from it. What they wear is quietly expensive, exquisitely made garments in premium natural materials, whose quality is apparent to those who know and invisible to those who don't. The inside signal, rather than the outside one. A sweater from Loro Piana in the finest vicuña wool, or a coat from a Savile Row tailor who has dressed the family for 4 generations. These things cost extraordinary amounts of money, but they carry no logo. The garment is the statement, not the tag. The second principle is fit and fabric over fashion. Old money wardrobes are not assembled seasonally. They are built over decades, composed of pieces that were bought to last, and that have, in fact, lasted. The navy blazer that has been worn for 20 years and has developed a particular softness and drape that a brand new version never could. The tweed jacket that belonged to a father or grandfather, now worn by the son with complete naturalness. The leather loafers that show the contours of years of wear. In the old money aesthetic, this worn quality is not embarrassing. It is a mark of distinction. It signals that the wearer does not chase trends, does not need to impress anyone with newness, and has had this quality in their life long enough to have worn it down. New money buys new things. Old money has old things and prefers them that way. Fashion editors describe the old money approach for women as stealth wealth, expensive materials, and expert tailoring that register as quality to those who can recognize it without ever screaming designer. Think cashmere in navy, camel, cream, or soft gray. Think simple gold jewelry, small, singular, often a family piece. Think well-cut trousers, silk scarves, and ballet flats, the cashmere sweater from Brunello Cucinelli or Johnston's of Elgin, the classic Hermès scarf, not as a status symbol, but as a piece that has been in the wardrobe for 15 years. For men, the vocabulary is equally restrained. Navy blazer, well-worn leather penny loafers, a simple dress, watch with a leather strap rather than a diamond-studded bracelet, cotton Oxford shirts, and, in sport contexts, the kind of clothes that suggest genuine participation rather than costuming. The old money man wears his tennis whites because he actually plays tennis, not because he wants to look like someone who does. And then there is perhaps the most counterintuitive element of the old money wardrobe, the deliberate acceptance of wear, imperfection, and even modest shabbiness. There is an English aristocratic tradition, sometimes called shabby chic, the practice of wearing things until they are genuinely worn out, not because you can't afford to replace them, but because replacing things that still function is wasteful, and wastefulness is its own form of vulgarity. The torn pocket lining in a Savile Row suit left unrepaired for years. The scuffed heel on a pair of Church's Oxfords. These aren't oversights. They are a quiet signal that you are not performing for an audience. You are simply living, comfortably, unhurriedly, and without reference to anyone else's opinion. The cars, vehicles as social signals. If you want a quick shortcut to understanding the difference between old and new money, look at the parking lot. New money drives new, current year Range Rovers, Mercedes S-Class, Ferrari SUVs, Tesla Model S. The car is an announcement. It is one of the most visible, mobile status signals available, a $150,000 vehicle that moves through the world advertising its owner's net worth at every traffic light. Old money drives old. Vintage Land Rover Defenders with rust in the wheel arches. Wood-paneled station wagons maintained by the same mechanic for 2 decades. Sensible, functional vehicles that suggest money is simply not something requiring an automotive announcement. The most famous living example of this principle is Warren Buffett. As of this writing, Buffett is worth an estimated $148 billion, making him one of the 5 wealthiest people on the planet. He lives in the same house in Omaha, Nebraska, that he purchased in 1958 for $31,500. He has driven modest, practical cars throughout his life. He once drove a Cadillac XTS, not a bad car, but hardly the chariot of a centibillionaire. The house, the car, the daily McDonald's breakfast, these are not false modesty. They are the consistent expression of a man who has genuinely internalized the idea that visible wealth is irrelevant to the actual experience of wealth. And the security implications of inconspicuous living are not to be underestimated. In 1987, two armed men attempted to abduct Buffett from his own office in Omaha, planning to demand a $100,000 ransom. Buffett, despite being one of the most famous wealthy men in the world, had cultivated enough of an ordinary-looking public life that the attempt failed. The experience reinforced his approach. The less visible your wealth, the safer you are. This is a principle that old money families have understood for centuries, and that applies globally. In countries with significant wealth inequality or political instability, the concealment of wealth is not just a cultural preference, it is a survival strategy. The wealthy family that lives quietly, drives modestly, and avoids drawing attention to itself does not attract the same risks as the one that broadcasts its net worth through every material choice. The home's architecture of discretion. The homes of old money families are perhaps the most revealing expression of their entire aesthetic philosophy, and they consistently confound expectations. Old money homes are not, generally speaking, the maximalist pleasure palaces that cultural fantasy might suggest. They are not always enormous, though they can be. They are not always immaculate. In fact, they are often the opposite. What they are, consistently, is layered, lived in, and filled with things that have histories. The interior philosophy is rooted in what designers call patina, the quality of beautiful aging that objects develop over decades and centuries of use. A well-worn Persian or Oriental rug that has occupied the same spot on the same floor for 3 generations. Chippendale or Queen Anne furniture that was made in the 18th century and has been repaired, reupholstered, and used continuously ever since. Oil paintings in gilded frames that are darkened with age. Silver that is subtly tarnished. A leather armchair that has been molded by years of occupation into something no new chair could replicate. The key design principle is an unwavering commitment to natural materials. Solid hardwoods, genuine leather, pure linen, wool. These materials age gracefully, developing character over time that synthetic alternatives simply cannot replicate. And the color palettes remain deliberately restrained. Warm neutrals, deep navy, forest green, rich burgundy. Nothing attention-seeking, nothing that would make a visitor feel like they were standing in a showroom. What's particularly striking is the deliberate absence of newness. An old money home almost never looks like it was recently decorated, because it wasn't. The furniture was inherited. The rugs were purchased by a grandparent. The curtains have been up for years. This isn't neglect. The underlying quality of everything is exceptional. But there is no desire to project modernity, trendiness, or even conspicuous investment in the space. The message encoded in every object is, we have been here a long time, and we expect to be here a long time more. This contrasts sharply with the interiors of the newly wealthy, which often feature all new everything, marble countertops, floor-to-ceiling glass, the latest furniture designs, and a general atmosphere of expensive novelty that broadcasts the recent arrival of money rather than its long habitation. Old money homes tell you wealth has been here forever. New money homes tell you wealth just arrived. The Agnelli family's Roman apartment, completed in 1970 and designed with deliberate minimalism, was described by designer Hubert de Givenchy as the only contemporary house he had seen with true grandeur. What made it grand was not extravagance, it was the combination of extraordinary art, personal heirlooms, and restraint. The grandeur came from selection, not accumulation, from confidence, not display. The social codes, how old money behaves. The visible markers of old money, the clothes, the cars, the homes, are only the surface layer of a much deeper behavioral code. Because in the end, old money's invisibility is not just aesthetic. It is a full social philosophy, expressed through language, manners, relationships, and the way people move through the world. Rule 1. Never talk about money. This is perhaps the most fundamental rule in old money culture, and it is enforced with near religious consistency. Old money people do not discuss their wealth publicly, do not boast about their financial achievements, do not name drop their net worth or their assets. Money is a private matter, the same way health is a private matter, or family conflict is a private matter. To discuss it openly is to demonstrate that you are still impressed by it. And old money is not impressed by money. This rule extends to asking about others' wealth as well. You do not inquire about the cost of someone's house, their salary, or their portfolio. These questions mark you instantly as someone from outside the culture, someone for whom money is still a novelty. Rule 2. Understate everything. The language of old money is the language of understatement. Not "we had an extraordinary dinner, but it was rather good." Not "this is an incredible property, but it's comfortable enough." Not "I'm extremely successful, but I've been quite fortunate." The British aristocratic version of this is essentially a cultural religion. The wry, self-deprecating, deliberately muted assessment of everything, however impressive it actually is. The goal is not false modesty. The goal is the communication of someone who has seen so much excellence in their life that excellence no longer requires exclamation. Rule 3. Privacy is paramount. Old money families are conspicuously absent from social media. They do not post their vacations, their property, their art collections, or their social gatherings for public consumption. This is partly cultural. These are private people with a deep-seated distaste for public performance, and partly practical. The more publicly your wealth is displayed, the more risks you attract, from fraudsters and opportunists to social obligations and public scrutiny. The rise of social media has created a new and fascinating contrast between old and new money in this regard. While influencers and newly successful entrepreneurs build entire platforms around their visible lifestyles, the genuinely wealthy old families are almost entirely absent from the digital public square. Their homes are not on Instagram. Their vacations are not documented on TikTok. Their wardrobes are not featured in YouTube hauls. They exist in the physical world, mediated by personal relationships and private networks. And they view the compulsion to broadcast life publicly with something approaching bewilderment. Rule 4. Seek quality, not novelty. Old money culture has an almost allergic reaction to the new, not because novelty is inherently bad, but because the constant pursuit of the newest thing is itself a signal that you haven't had quality long enough to have grown tired of it. An old money family doesn't trade in their car because a newer model came out. They don't redecorate their home because a new aesthetic is trending. They don't update their wardrobe because the season changed. They buy things of exceptional quality when they need them, use them until they are genuinely done, and feel no compulsion to keep pace with anyone else's consumption cycle. Rule 5. The old boy network operates invisibly. The social connections of old money families are extraordinarily powerful, but they operate entirely below the surface. No LinkedIn profiles advertising board memberships, no Instagram collaborations with luxury brands. The introductions happen in private dining rooms, on the sidelines of school events, during weekends at country properties, at club dinners where no one outside the membership knows what is said. The power is real, but it is invisible, and that invisibility is not incidental. It is the point. Power exercised privately is more durable than power exercised publicly. Quiet luxury in popular culture, the modern moment. Something interesting has been happening in popular culture over the last several years. The aesthetics and values of old money have broken out of their private circles and become a mass cultural fascination. HBO's Succession, perhaps the most culturally significant television drama of the last decade, built an entire visual language around this phenomenon. The Roy family and their old money associates wear clothes with no visible logos. Their homes are understated. They speak in clipped understatements. And the show's costume designers made a conscious choice to contrast these characters against the newer money arrivals who wear flashier, louder clothes and give themselves away at every turn. The show's creators understood intuitively what Veblen documented in 1899. Visible wealth is the behavior of someone who hasn't had it long enough to be bored by it. In March 2023, Gwyneth Paltrow became an unlikely icon of this aesthetic when she appeared in a courtroom wearing understated, high-quality, logo-free clothing for a skiing lawsuit case. The internet erupted not because the clothes were expensive, though they were, but because they were so quietly, perfectly correct. No one could accuse her of trying. That was the point. TikTok videos tagged with the hashtag #OldMoneyAesthetic have accumulated billions of views, a fascinating inversion in which young people who have never been anywhere near generational wealth are reverse engineering its visual codes from the outside. Entire industries have sprung up selling quiet luxury capsule wardrobes, understated furniture, and the aesthetic of comfortable, inherited elegance to a mass market audience. But here is the deepest irony of this trend. The moment an aesthetic becomes a trend, the moment it becomes something you perform, it ceases to be what it was. Old money's aesthetic power comes precisely from the fact that it is not performed. It is simply how things are, after many, many years of things being that way. You cannot buy the worn quality of a 30-year-old cashmere sweater by purchasing a new one. You cannot replicate the ease of a person who grew up in rooms full of beautiful old things by filling your apartment with expensive replicas of them. The lived quality, the time embedded in the aesthetic, is the one element that cannot be manufactured. This is perhaps the most profound thing about old money's invisibility. The invisibility itself is a byproduct of time, and time is the one luxury that money, new or old, cannot purchase. The real reasons behind the invisibility. A synthesis. Now that we've looked at the history, the psychology, the fashion, the architecture, and the social codes, let's bring it together. Why really does old money never look rich? Reason 1. Psychological security. When wealth is inherited and expected to continue indefinitely, there is no psychological need to validate it through display. The status is assumed. The performance would be redundant and therefore embarrassing. Reason 2. Social camouflage. Old money families are not trying to impress you. They are communicating with a very small group of people who share their codes, and those people recognize the signals without any need for amplification. The understatement is legible to the right audience. The wrong audience is not the target. Reason 3. Safety and privacy. Visible wealth is a target, from kidnappers to fraudsters, from opportunistic social climbers to tax scrutiny. Broadcasting your net worth creates risks that a person with any sense would prefer to avoid. The concealment of wealth is not just cultural, it is rational and protective. Reason 4. The distinction game. Since the European aristocracy first developed these codes to distinguish themselves from the nouveau riche, old money has understood that the way to remain distinct is to move in the opposite direction from whoever is trying to imitate you. When the new rich put on Gucci, old money moves further into quiet simplicity. When luxury logos become mass market, old money retreats into unbranded craftsmanship. The distinction is always maintained, not through escalation, but through retreat. Reason 5. The contempt for impermanence. Old money culture has a deep reverence for things that last: objects, relationships, values, institutions. The fast fashion impulse, the newest model car, the latest home decor trend, these are all expressions of impermanence, of things that don't last. And impermanence is, in the old money world view, a sign of poor judgment. Quality that lasts is worth having. Quality that doesn't last is a waste of resources, and waste, ironically, is the one indulgence that old money genuinely finds inexcusable. What this means for the rest of us. The deeper lesson. I want to be careful here, because there's a version of this conversation that can slide into pure aspiration, a desire to imitate old money aesthetics as a way to signal something about yourself. And if you've been paying attention, you'll recognize the irony. That impulse is itself the new money instinct. The deeper lesson from old money's invisibility is not a fashion lesson. It's a values lesson. The old wealthy understood something that gets drowned out in our culture of constant performance and social media validation. What you have is not who you are. The display of wealth is always, at its core, an attempt to make other people think something about you. And the need for other people to think well of you and based on what you own is a form of emotional dependence that has nothing to do with actual freedom or security. The people who are genuinely free, psychologically, financially, socially, do not need to announce it. They simply live it. They drive cars they like. They wear clothes that fit well and last long. They invest in the quality of their private life, not the optics of their public one. They build relationships based on who people are, not on what those people will think of them. This is the actual wealth signal that old money has been transmitting for centuries, not cashmere or Land Rovers or Savile Row suits. Those are just the material expressions of a deeper orientation toward life. The real signal is this: I am secure enough in who I am that I have no need to perform for you. And that kind of security, it's available to anyone. You don't need to inherit a fortune. You just need to stop spending your life trying to look like you have one. Money speaks, but wealth whispers. And the oldest, deepest, most durable wealth, the kind that survives not just one generation but 10, tends to whisper so quietly that you'd walk right past it in a parking lot, never knowing it was there at all. The worn-in loafer, the decade-old Land Rover, the cashmere sweater with no logo, the woman who already knows everyone in the room before she walks in. These aren't the signs of someone who can't afford more. They're the signs of someone who stopped counting a very long time ago. If you found this video genuinely interesting, and I think you did because you're still here, please hit like and subscribe. And drop a comment below. Which part of this surprised you most? Was it the psychology? Fashion? The history? Let me know. More content like this is coming. Content that goes beneath the surface of how wealth, class, and social power actually operate in ways that no one openly talks about. See you in the next one.